Good morning, and welcome to the Sunday edition. Joining as my co-host, the future governor of Virginia, TK Eppley. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Ford, and this is EchelonOrchid.
Guess who's back?
Good morning, TK. How's
Good
it
morning,
going?
fine sir. Rockstar mug you have there.
Yeah, this was a birthday present from my stepsons. They felt like they're like, oh, we need to get this coffee mug for him. So
Nice.
Representing that today. Also, today is which is going to be interesting because we decided that, at least for the next 3 weeks, we're going to do the carnivore diet, and
Right.
just to try to, basically, for at least in our opinion, the carnivore diet's basically an extreme elimination diet, and then we'll start to see what add certain things back in and see how we feel.
Nice.
I don't think for either one of us that going completely without vegetables for too long is like, because we kind of like fruits and vegetables, so we kind of want them on occasion, but we got to figure out, hey, how can we get into shape quickly without killing ourselves? And we said, all right, well, let's start doing some BJJ and back to the gym, getting up early and getting after it, and we'll just eat a bunch of meat.
That's awesome.
We're gonna cheat a little bit in that, or at least we're using it all, like, we're not going away from like spices and herbs and stuff like that for, like, I'm not going to go that extreme. Like, I'm not looking to just have the taste of meat and salt. Like, so.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. You know how I feel. You cut out the dense carbs, breads and stuff like that. Aside from the anti-inflammatory aspects of that, the biggest advantage I see is you're creating a different insulin response in your body, and you're basically tamping that. You're like the sine wave of highs and lows with that. You're minimizing that, and that is the big weight loss. And I think it'll be easy for you guys to put vegetables back in. When I say I'm talking cabbage, Brussels sprout, those the really high macro content, and not feel like you're just basically attacking a cow every afternoon.
Yeah. It's
now you're doing cheese and everything like that. You like still the dairy,
Yep. Anything that's an animal or animal byproduct, so eggs, cheese.
Yeah, I know you're supposed to do the carnivore diet.
Yeah, and we're just we're looking at, all right, how can we get back to where we want, mainly because with COVID around here, outside of us going out to walk, there was like everything was closed. Like they just there was, and so while we ate and drank the same way, we can't work out the same way.
Right.
We don't have all of that stuff, and we were able to do some things. We've got the bands and things like that, but there's just there's only so much when we're used to that routine.
Right.
So now we're creating a different routine now, which will be fun. It'll be interesting.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I had this LinkedIn debate kind of over the weekend, and this is one of the things that's been kind of really bothering me, because every time there is a cyber attack, you immediately hear calls for, we need to start holding boards, CEOs, CIOs, CTOs, and CISOs criminally liable for these breaches. And my response is, so you expect a private organization to be able to defend itself against nation state actors? The response came back, in some circumstances, yes. And I'm like, no, it doesn't matter how big you are. It doesn't matter if you are Walmart today, the Fortune 1, or Google, or I don't know, Microsoft, because it just happened to them not too long ago. You're not withstanding against a nation state actor. And I'm not going to try to hold people criminally liable for, because where do you go? Because I could say as a CIO, hey, through the supply chain, I don't know that they don't have that widget that came from this country, that they didn't update their particular firmware on time. It's so this whole criminal libel aspect, I go, I completely disagree with. But on top of that, I go, there's a little clause in like the insurance policies. It says that they will basically, they will help, from the insurance to the insuring of the systems and things of that nature, unless it's an act of war. Because then the United States government is supposed to be protecting.
Right.
And yet, so the failure to me goes back to, U.S. government. You knew these were cyber attacks. Like, it's not a hack. It's an attack by nation state actors.
Right. Well, if you look at the Colonial Pipeline thing, one of the interesting things to me this week is there was a press conference, and whomever from the cyber people within the administration, right? I mean, we can talk all day about the primacy that the government puts on treating cyber attacks and treating the critical infrastructure and defining what the critical infrastructure is, right? I've heard everything from elected officials, senators in particular, saying, well, if you were driving an electric car, you wouldn't have to have worried about the pipeline attack, right? So you're discounted from being an adult in the room because you're talking about an agenda. You're not talking about the real problem. The person that they had up on the podium next to the press secretary to try to talk through this basically said, this is a private matter and industry needs to take care of it. Walked it back a day later, right? But the first thought that this administration had was that this is a private matter, right? And here's the thing. You and I both have said in the past that, the previous president had a demonstrable amount of shortcomings, right? And this has nothing to do with him. But if this attack had taken place under his administration and whomever from the administration was the paid talking head to get up and explain it, had explained it in that way, that it was just a private matter for industry to take care of, they'd have gotten wrecked. They have absolutely, and rightfully so, right? Because you're talking about the level of effort. Like, we've put almost no level of effort into defending critical infrastructure from like an OT perspective. Yeah. Everybody is really, really highly attuned to IT protection, right? And all businesses are. But now, what are we and what have we been doing with OT protection? For years, whether it was the power grid or anything else, they were segregated systems that weren't on the internet. But now everybody's like, well, we need to monitor, we have to think. So then you put them and made them internet capable. And then we're surprised when this is the byproduct of that, right? And I think that like the OT piece is whether it's like with Kevin Center or Bayshore, Drago, all these other, Dragos, or all these other companies that are out there that are really saying, hey, we want to turn and pivot and say, we're going to focus on OT, not IT. And how do we do that correctly? It's almost as if, and in my mind, especially if it was the power company, right? The lights went out, right? That's different than the petroleum industry, which has in politics, like, there's a significant portion that want the petroleum industry to go away, right? And so they're like, hey, look, this is what you got. But and I can make the argument, hey, if I had you have a Tesla, for example, and I've got full PVs on my house, and I'm powering that big Tesla battery from the full PVs, and it's charging my thing, I could be off the grid. The problem with the people that, like, well, if you had an electric vehicle, well, where do you think on a normal daily basis you get the power, you get the electrons to power that battery?
Wind. It's all from wind.
It's all, yeah, and not the kind of thing. But that's like, to me, this is one of those, people don't want to. What do you think the net dollar amount that the government would have to put against to buff up the critical infrastructure to even a remotely acceptable, but in a public-private partnership with business, right? Business has to own it as much as they can. But and I totally agree with you. and this goes back to us in arguments that we've had with companies in either consulting or being at the company. Hey, what's your risk? What's your level of risk you're willing to accept? And they have to, and we've talked about this before, because you go to a lot of boards are like 0. Okay, well then just shut down, because you can't defend against a nation state with the resources you have on hand. You could spend every single dollar you're spending in this company right now, whether it's on payroll or anything else, and you're still not going to be completely resistant to a nation state attack. All right. So let's start with what's important. Like, what is critical? What has to be protected at all costs? Let's do that. And then as we move away from that in lessening degrees of importance, understand that some of this stuff might be out in the public domain. All right.
Yeah. This is what's interesting to me. All these, these politicians that they start talking about criminally liable. You know who should be criminally liable? How about Congress? Because in 2015, with the Office of Personnel Management breach by China, compromised how many private citizens' clearance information, which also had your biometrics.
Millions.
Okay. And so you want to talk about criminally liable? That's Congress's job. They literally have this thing called an oversight committee, right? They have all of these things, and they want to go and talk about the pipeline attack. My clearance was breached because I was always a civilian. So, they've got everything in there from all the stuff that I've done. It's out there. So you want to talk about, this pipeline attack, but they don't want to look at themselves. They don't want to hold a government agency accountable for, that's like their job. Like, why is our clearance information even accessible via anything? Like,
you had one job,
right? Now we'll fast forward. So we've got the pipeline attack today, but this is not the first one. Just a few short months ago, the water supply company in Florida, like those hackers were within minutes of basically poisoning the water system in Florida.
Right.
So this is 2 attacks. People can say, oh, well, the Florida one was leaked credentials. Well, I mean, okay.
That's
maybe.
even worse.
Right. And so now, so you're of this utility. So any of these utility companies, let's say they've got, they may have a couple thousand employees, but their IT staffing is not going to be that high. So what do you think you're going to get? I don't know what the dollar amount would be from that private public partnership, but I mean, I guess let's first could go somewhat common sense and use jump hosts. And for those who don't know what a jump host is, basically I'm going to create my secure connection, and that secure connection requires me to go to another system, and that's the only system that's permissible. And there is a step up level of authentication. So it's not even the same username that you would use to get into your regular VPN, right? It is a separate infrastructure. So now you increase that aspect from the bad actor of being able to do it. They've got to get onto that other system. And that's the system that you've spent a lot of resources on, who's getting in, who's not. And oh, by the way, changes are controlled. You've got a different group in the company that says, yes, you're authorized to do this. Here is your change window. That change window is from 12 midnight to 4 a.m. That group comes on at 11:55 p.m. They enable the account for that period of time. The work is done. That group goes back in and disables it because the previous group doesn't have access to enable or disable accounts. That solves this, right away. Now, it requires discipline.
Well, that's it's funny because let's even go back to not nation state stuff, not anything. It's no secret that the easiest way to protect your own individual online identity, all the usernames and credentials that you have, is with multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
And most people are like, what a pain in the ass. Well, not really, right? Because I don't care how big and strong my password is. It just doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, because these companies out there are storing your password unencrypted. So guess what?
Well, but
when it gets breached,
they are. it like using the the scalability and speed and power of the elasticity of the internet and the back end servers. It doesn't matter what the password is. We can crunch most of those passwords, right? So now make my password 123. I don't care, because I've got a hardware key that I plug in, and I can give an individual machine the power not to require that key every time. But unless they compromise my physical device, anybody tries to get into any of my stuff, and especially with social media, right? If you have any type of presence on social media, I don't know, like every elected official, if the people that are setting that up for them and advising them say you're not using multi-factor, you're basically inviting them to have their social media account hacked, randomly have somebody use the N-word on there, and that's a negative you're never going to disprove.
So do you think the president has multi-factor on his Venmo account?
I don't even the thing is, that's like when you talk about it, like we have a nation of great app users and technology users, but we also have a culture of not my fault, right? And I think when you start talking about liability, right, the liability is, hey, are you doing the easy things? Like and I think when you look at a big enterprise or a critical infrastructure asset, you're right. There's a lot of things. There's jump hosts. But it all starts with doing the easy stuff well, right? What's the bread and butter, right? And it's number one. It's never hard for me to, because here's the thing. Like, you can back it up with multiple different factors. So if I'm somewhere and I don't have my hardware key, I have a second two-factor in a Google Authenticator or a Microsoft Authenticator, right? But what you're saying is, I have something I have, something I know. Right. And the something I have is that secondary authentication. So my password becomes less important. Right? And in the case of when people say, well, let's just all go to biometrics, you just made the point that your biometrics were compromised because of the OPM hack. All right. And that's the thing that just infuriates me, is everybody wants to do, and this is sales folks, right? We go in and we sell this, every company, hey, we can do this, we can do that, we can do this. Right, and they've got the next box that's the best box. We want to take that other company's crappy box out, and our new box is all that in a bag of chips. Yeah, but you're using multi-factor.
Yeah,
well, it doesn't matter, because you're not doing the easy shit well.
Yeah, and for those who don't want to know, like, how do they have my biometrics? Well, anyone in the OPM more than likely did. So I had to go into this 5-sided building quite often, right across the river in DC, that requires this thing called a CAC. So a common access card is a DoD form of identification. It was before they moved to the PIV, but your fingerprints were in there. And so, it's my fingerprints, are a part of that biometrics. They didn't have, retinal scans or anything along those lines. I don't even know if they're doing that today for like the PIV cards or not. I don't know.
Think about this, like the clear to go in, to get the alternative to TSA with a clear.
Yeah. They use the retina scan, which is
right. Right. They do fingerprints and retina, right? And so, how many times are you giving that stuff away? Right. Well, again, it's people don't ask questions because it becomes a matter of convenience.
Yeah.
Right. And anybody that wants to argue with me about, I did an event for a consortium of CEOs of accounting firms, right? And so one of them said to me, like, what's the single easiest thing I can do from an IT perspective to protect mine and all my clients' information? I'm like, multi-factor authentication, right? Because they're all small accounting firms. They're not mom and pops, but they're not big five. The association they belong to makes them the big six, right? Because now they have the buying power of KPMG, Anderson, those bigger ones. But they're all concerned. And one of the things I loved is, that's a great question, right? Because it's like, hey, I'm legitimately concerned about my clients, the security of my clients' information. What's the single easiest thing I can do? Because you're saying, hey, if I'm not doing that, why all the rest of it doesn't matter, right? I can have a concrete bunker, but if I can't correctly lock the front door, none of it matters. Like, that's the
absolutely
right. And so I said multi-factored. I'm on a Zoom call, and there's probably 30 or 40 people in the window. And while I'm moving on to another topic, I see that person mute themselves, and all of a sudden I see them pick up their cell phone. They're on the cell phone, right? And I hang up. It hangs up, and when it hangs up, I go, hold on. I go back and I go, who are you just talking to? And she's like, oh, I just called my IT manager. He's been bitching at me to get multi-factor for like the last 6 months, and I was been blowing him off because I thought it was too difficult. And she goes, now I've got it today, right? And that's the bigger problem is. And this is for all you folks out in listener land. The reason that Gartner exists is because CEOs don't trust the CIO, the CISO, and chief security officers in their companies because they figure they have they have vendor bias. And so they look at Forrester, Gartner, and those other clearinghouses and say, well, what do they say? Well, then what happens is everybody knows the game. So the Pavlovian response is all of the CISO CIOs, they go right, what's in the top right quadrant of Gartner, and they buy it without question, right? And I'm not saying that they're bad people in the thing, but for those of you in the industry, there's a certain aspect of pay to play, right? And when I say there's a certain aspect, if you don't pay, you don't get to play. You will never get put in that quadrant, right? And all of these folks hire people that used to work at these companies, right? Because they're technical experts. I'm not saying they're doing anything nefarious, but then their biases creep in, right? And Dan, I mean, you're at the front line of this. How often? But I'll say this: from what I've met, or meeting your CEO and what you said, he's a reasonable human being, right? That is more thoughtful than some of the others. Because you're right, people look at IT as a cost center, not an integral part of company success. And until that basic fact changes, a lot of the stuff's not going to matter because they won't ever spend. I'm not saying you got to go berserk in what you spend, but you have to be more diligent in looking at it through the prism of Moore's law, as opposed to, hey, we've got a buying cycle of 18 months, 36 months, whatever that is.
Yeah. So before I answer, you reminded me of this joke that my dad told me just yesterday, which was quite funny. When you're talking about the person getting on their cell phone. So President Biden goes out to meet with one of the large Native American tribes, and he gets out there and he says to the chief, "Hey, chief, how are things going? What can we do?" He's like, "Well, things are great, but my people are getting sick." And he's like, "Well, what do you mean? You have this brand new hospital." And he goes, "Well, I have this brand new hospital, but I don't have any nurses or doctors to staff this with." So the president gets on his cell phone, makes a call, and says, "Okay, chief, Monday morning, you'll have a full staff." He goes, "Okay, great, thanks." He goes, "Well, what else can I help you with?" And he goes, "Well, Mr. President, one of the big things is we have no cell phone reception here."
Nice.
So, which your cell phone thing kind of reminded me of that particular joke. There was probably a couple other pieces in there in the middle before it got to the cell phone one, because I think there was like 2 or 3 times the president gets on his phone and makes the call. But getting back to this, so when you talk about the basic building blocks, got to do the basics right. So authentication should be the thing that people focus on first. Now, it's not everything, but it's where you got to focus on that if you can control, the identity and access management piece, and then you're really good at vulnerability identification or remediation, you're pretty solid. Like, to me, those are the two basic things. But you have to constantly, iterate. You don't. And part of the reason why I believe most of these companies have an issue is that the CIOs, the CTOs, the CISOs, they don't spend enough time working on the business. They're too much time in the business. I hardly spend any time with my technology people, other than my one-on-ones, my coaching type stuff with them. But I'm spending almost all of my time with my peers in the organization, talking to them, building that trust up, finding out about how they need to run their business units, so then I can eventually figure out the technology needs, and then I hand that to my CTO to go execute. But I'm building that trust. I'm building that social capital up within the organization, and I'm not talking to them about technology.
Right.
It's if I start doing that, they don't understand it. So I mean, that's a big reason why I went to the big M, U of M, which was to learn the language of business and the way in which business people talk.
You have to meet people where they live.
Yeah.
Period. And it's funny you say that, and this comes back to, we talked about this before. The natural, I hate to say it, but too many leaders, and especially tech leaders, they hoard knowledge, right? And they dole it out to their people because they have to be the smartest person in the room. Because frankly, more than any other department, that's how the technology folks work, right? And what you've done is say, look, we're going to work this, and I'm going to give you my complete context of decision making, and I'm going to expect more out of you, because in order for this organization to effectively function, I need you to be able to do all the technology stuff, because I used to do your job, and pick any one of those other, CISO, CIO, CTO, you had all those jobs. That now it allows me to go and be the organizational representative of the technology vision to the rest of the company, right? And that's a growth industry, right? Because it's the thing. It's like when I talk to the CEOs, when I talk to boards of companies and stuff, like, hey, is your CIO, is there a representative from technology and information security at the board meeting? More often than not, it's no, right? And I'm like, you've got to be in 2021. You've got to be kidding me. Right? In 2015, you have to be kidding me, right? But I think that's the fundamental change, right? Because you and I both believe it's like, I don't care what framework you use to talk about maturity, pick one. I like NIST because it's got bright colors, right? It's red, yellow, green. It's like, you can't, like, you look at it, you know where you're at, right? And so if the entire organization doesn't have a rudimentary understanding of how we're trying to mature the business in all aspects, then that piece is going to fail. And that leg, you become a one man. And some of it, I think, is about culpability, because everybody's like, hey, that IT stuff over there in some measures, or this IT security is wizardry. And I don't really understand it. And I don't want to be in the room when it all goes wrong. Right. But tell me today that a VP of something that wants to be a CEO that shouldn't be concerned about how the cybersecurity of the company they work with functions, where they're going, what they do, why money is spent on it, and how. Right? I don't like, and this isn't for tech companies. This is for every durable company in the world. Is like how, where do you think Walmart focuses a lot of their cybersecurity on? Point of sale, right? They don't want all their money going away. Right. And then they've got bigger problems, because you're right, they're vendor number one. And what do they spend? Right. I mean, as a percentage of what they have. Right. Because they've never been known to throw money around wildly.
Yeah. So, as I started this conversation off about, the LinkedIn stuff, and this is the part that becomes a little bit more concerning to me. The person who said this was Malcolm Hawkins. And for those that may not know who Malcolm is, he's the former CISO for Intel. The former CISO for, I can't remember what the name of the product company, but BlackBerry bought them as the endpoint product. Stuart McClure was the CEO. Let's see, BlackBerry. I can't remember who BlackBerry bought. BlackBerry. Eyes. Cylance.
Yeah.
So he was the CISO for Cylance. And now he's on a number of different boards. But this is what's concerning to me, is that you've got some guy that, basically, again, let's go back to the senator who had said, hey, well, this wouldn't have happened if we had electronic vehicles. I believe that, Malcolm is saying something along these lines because he sits on the boards of companies that claim to be able to detect all these zero-day attacks and things of that nature. And I think it's a very disingenuous thing to say.
They're using products of companies he's worked for.
Yep.
right? I mean, that's, and there's not a self-effacing nature to that, right? But Intel is interesting to me because they had a CEO. His name begins with a K. I can't remember his name. He's now the CEO of another company, and how he got that job, I have no idea, because he's said in public, "I really don't like people." As the CEO as the leader of anything, if you don't like people, it's one thing to say, "I'm an introvert and I'm uncomfortable in large crowds," because we've had introverts of companies that are great leaders and they've done great things, right? But to just blanketly say, "I don't like people," right? And he made some decisions when he was the CEO of Intel that has pushed them into a place where they had to completely rethink what they're doing in the 21st century.
Yeah, like what? I still don't understand why Intel bought McAfee. It just did not make sense to me.
Right, because you got away from the core of what makes you great.
Yeah.
Right. But to say you don't like people is crazy to me. Right. And more importantly, to be given a second bite at the apple. Right. And I mean, that's and with your track record of what you did at your previous company.
Well, because that person had been there before. This is this aspect why so many people, it's difficult for them to get their first something, their first job, their first management position, their first C-level position, their first CEO position. It's those first. Too many companies are willing to bet on a CEO that has failed previously than they are willing to bet on someone who's never been a CEO before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's unfortunate because, well, for many reasons, if the CEO has a track record of failing, what's the probability that they're going to fail again? Well, it's not zero. It's not zero.
You don't have to go into the business world. Go to the NFL.
Yeah.
How many coaches that were marginal coaches somewhere else get a second chance and a third chance to try to figure out being a head coach? Right. And when people want to talk about diversity, like especially in the NFL, they put a lot of effort, or they give a lot of lip service to a lot of effort to get diversity hires into leadership positions. Right. But even there, it's like, there's times where you're like, how in God's name did they just give that guy a job? He's proven twice that he can't coach at the head coaching level. Now, I think the one thing the NFL in particular does is amazing is if you're a great offensive coordinator, for the most part, unless your name's Eric Bieniemy, which for reasons passing understanding does not have a head coaching job right now. But if you're a great offensive coordinator, for example,
like Norv Turner.
Yeah, and he was. And same like Kyle Shanahan, like go pick, they're out there, right? You'll get an opportunity to be a head coach, right? So think about that in business. I'm a great CEO, I'm a great COO, I'm a great CMO, I'm a great CTO. Mostly the COOs and CFOs are where the next line of CEOs are coming from, right? I think that's going to change, especially now when you start talking about the technology stuff we've been talking about. But for now, mostly COOs and CFOs are the ones that get elevated. Right? If it's a retail company, sometimes the CMO, if they're a visionary and they've got some other diversity of jobs in their background, right? Well, that guy gets elevated or girl gets elevated to being the CEO. If they suck, they're going to be stuck there for a while, right? Because it's hard for the board to retract that and do that well, right? Well, guy goes and coaches at the NFL level as a head coach. He's a great offensive coordinator. He really sucks as a head coach. They do the best thing humanly possible. The minute that guy gets fired as a head coach, every team wants him back as an offensive coordinator, and they'll overpay for him because even though he wasn't successful as a head coach, he now not only is an innovative, great thinker in the offensive side of the ball or defensive side of the ball, depending on where they come from, but now he's seen the whole board. And so now he's like the super coordinator, right? That is the biggest problem that's wrong with business, is that when you get elevated to one step past your competency, there's no way to unwind that, right? And now a guy feels they got to go from thing. A lot of times, if it's mid-tier companies, they were CEO, they weren't that great. Those folks will try to go to a bigger company and then take the job they used to have, saying, hey, I was really good at this. I left being the CEO of mid-tier company, whatever, because I wanted the opportunity to be a leader in this much larger organization, right? But this idea where you can't take a step back and go back to what you were really good at harms business in a way that's liberating in professional sports.
Yeah, it's true.
And you know why?
Surprising.
You know why?
I have my suspicions.
Go in and unwind a P&L. Go in and unwind all the documents other than bottom line revenue to prove a CEO is not doing a good job. In professional sports, ball don't lie.
Exactly. There's
Right?
a score. There's a score. There's too many ways in which any company can manipulate the books.
Any board can use any metric to justify their actions.
Yep. And people may wonder what I say by manipulate. I can say, so there's only one thing accurate on any of the financial statements at any given time, and that's cash.
Yeah.
From that point forward, everything else is an estimate. It's a guess.
It's an extrapolation.
Yep. Because I can go, well, we have this much in accounts receivables, except there is an allocation for bad debts. So that a certain percentage of what your receivables are supposed to be, you're never going to collect. So you estimate that. Maybe you say it's 5%. Well, if all of a sudden I'm not hitting my numbers, guess what? It didn't become 5% now. It just became like 3%. And now all of a sudden I can show that I had more revenue than or more in this case, more profit. And all of a sudden I went from the red to the black.
Well, no, that's why we joke around. Like if you ask a math guy what 2 + 2 is, he's going to tell you 4. You ask an MBA, they're going to. You ask your CFO, they're like, "What quarter does it have to be 4?"
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. There's so many ways, and I'm not saying that all these companies do that, but I'm pretty sure they all do that. I mean, they're predicting. It's a projection. Like you just have to have. You've got to be able to back up whatever your estimate is. But it's interesting in how they do those things, and because it's easy to see, or rather, it's not easy to see the score at the end of the game, because the score can change at any given moment.
Well, it's one thing in public companies, but private companies, you start getting layers of how do I put this? Layers of investment in incompetence or less than competent management, right? Because if you've got a PE firm or VC firm, they invest a sizable amount of resources into that company. How quickly are they going to be willing to change the leadership team? Right. And, do you redline everybody? Do you go, well, hey, this one little piece is doing well. How much could they do better if they had a competent CEO? Right. And what's the level of nepotism and sycophant behavior that got that executive team to where they're at, right? Because there's an inverse law. The weaker the leader, the higher the percentage of guaranteed that they are going to have incompetent people below them. Because in order to be a great leader, you have to be strong enough to say, you know more than I do, and I'm hiring you because in this instance, I know that. That's my blind spot, and I need somebody that really has their shit together to help me out with my blind spot. And you have to announce it to everyone. Because here's the thing, folks. Everybody knows your blind spots as a leader, whether you know them or not, right? And whether you actually, if you should know them, right? Because we've talked about this before. The more senior you go, Dan and I both believe that your ability to identify and fix your weak spots is what separates average from great, right? And it's when we when people call us to give them a reference, it's a silly question for me at a C-level. So what does Dan need to do? What could he do better? And I will be like, that's a dumb question at that level, right? The question is, What has Dan been weak at in the past that he's identified himself and fixed? All right. That's a great question to ask a reference for a C-level leader. Right? If you're asking guys, he was a great individual contributor and now you're going to make him a director. That's a perfect question to ask. What's their weakness? Right? Well, their weakness is they can't self-identify all their weaknesses.
Yeah, they don't know them yet.
Right?
They haven't had to.
Right. They haven't had enough. They haven't walked around the block enough times to basically go, hey, every time I walk there, it's the old Groundhog Day. Every time he walked out, he stepped in that big puddle because he had every day he had no form of reference of having stepped in that puddle and made that mistake. And it's the reason we don't make CEOs right out of college. We don't make admirals right out of the academy. You have to have enough turns of the wheel to go, that's going to really hurt if I do that again. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's what amazes me about like working around and hearing peers and friends of mine talk about the leadership team sometimes, that the board gets so invested in what they invested in that they will allow, they're just like, we'll figure this out. We'll go get the executive team, executive coaching. Right. At what point, and I make my living doing that to a certain extent. Right. But at what point is that, look, you've got, 3-4 years of history of a company and this isn't changing. Why do you let the same crap happen every day of the week? I truly, it baffles me sometimes when you listen to people and it's a mix of hubris and ego. And hey, I would tell the CEO, go get rid of everybody and get people that know more than you do. Well, he's really good or she does this and they do that. And I'm like, okay, now you're just making excuses to keep people around you that insulate your feelings, not help you achieve. Right. And I think that the CEOs that quickly realize, like Steve Jobs had a great line, why are we going to hire smart people and then tell them what to do? Right. Bring people in here. Your job as a CEO, for example, is to provide vision, control, and guidance. Right. And be the example.
Yeah, it's right? To establish the framework in which each of the other chief officers have to be able to operate within.
And then let them roam around up to and including where they jump over the lines and try to do things and be innovative that have never been great because they've got your complete context of decision making. And in that context is their greatness. And as a leader, and this is something like in the military, you learn from day one. Your job is to ensure that your people are prepared to move to the next level of management or leadership at the conclusion of your time being there. What your succession plan is always to put everybody in the best position to succeed you. Now, one person might rise to the top, or one person usually does rise to the top, but you're giving everybody the equal opportunity to be greater than they thought they could be. All right. Right. And that to me is where most big companies fall down because you're largely, they get in a CYA mode with the board and with everything else, and they're using the financial documents of the company, as their shield.
Right. This is one of the things that I have a lot of conversations with when it comes to my managers, so to speak, the people who have to execute.
Right.
And the conversation I have with them is this. I, as the leader, define the what. And that what has come from all of my consultation with the CEO and my peers within the organization to determine that what. You largely, like 90%, control the when. And so when I'm saying here's the what, your job is to determine when it can be done. And if I don't and there's maybe a little bit of a negotiation of that when, because maybe I know the significance of the what, and I will rearrange some priorities. But most of the time, like 90% of the time, easily, you define the when, and then I'm going back and I'm advertising that when to my peers and across the organization. And you have to own that when, because the managers, like one of the things I say is the difference between a leader and a manager is that a leader is trying to forecast where we need to be 3-5 years down the road, and then are managing we'll just say measuring the progress of that. A manager has to execute They are
Right.
working in the business. They are the executors, and they're getting it done. And that's why managers report status. Right? That's their job, so we can make decisions. And there's nothing wrong with that, because they have to understand that status. Because what I've told them is that the best way that you move from manager to leader is when your predictions of the when it's going to be completed becomes extremely accurate.
Right.
Because you've been able to predict into the future how long. So I've told them, I'm not going to be so upset if we miss the when. As long as I find out that we're going to miss the when, well before the when date was supposed to occur.
Not at the when.
Right? I said, as soon as it goes from green status to yellow status, that's when I should be getting my text message to Teams, whatever it happens to be, so I'm aware.
Right.
And then we can re-baseline perhaps, because it's okay if we missed it. It's like, all right, well, why? Understand why? Because you're trying to predict so many things. How many times people are going to miss work? What's the capabilities of the people doing it? What's the vendor relationships? What do you have to rely on the business units? How are we going to test this? So you're predicting. It's a lot of things. But if you don't try and take your best guess, you're never going to get there. But that management aspect of predicting the when is going to help them become a leader. So now they can start predicting the what.
Right.
And
as a leadership, you're in the vision and growth business.
Yeah.
Right? Here's the vision of the company. How do I grow my team through whatever leadership principles? How do I grow my team to be able to accept and manage the vision? Right. And your ability to articulate the vision so that your management team, your subordinate management team, can create the now, and go, here's why we do what we do. Here's how we do it. And the public doesn't care the how, right? When you're selling. So the public, that's of that ring of how, why, how, what, and why. People want to know why you do what you do. But if you can articulate your why, or what you do, but if you can articulate your why, right? As a leader within the organization, here is who we are. Here's the why. Like, why do we exist, right? And it's not to make money, right? Yes, that's the byproduct of what we do. But why do we do what we do? And then, hey, you've got to have a win, like, because then what we do on the external facing thing, now what we do is we're scalable, predictable, and repeatable, which means we can be successful. Right? It's a reason people line up to go get iPhones when they say they're going to be released, because they know Apple is good at that, scalable, predictable, and repeatable piece, and that they will deliver to the Apple Store on the date that they say they're going to deliver with what they said they were going to deliver. Right? Because on the back end, you're correct. Their management of the vision and their management of their oversight of execution is become impeccable over the years. Because, there's a great story. I can't remember who told. I heard it on thing where I think it was Simon Sinek. He had the opportunity years ago. I'll tell you how long ago in a minute by what I'm going to articulate. He had the opportunity to go in the same week be at Microsoft and be at Apple. And when he's at Microsoft, when he left, they gave him a Zune. And for those of you that don't know what a Zune is, it was Microsoft's version of the iPod. It was their entry into the field of the iPod. And when he looked at it, having owned an iPod, he felt that the product was technically better. All of the technical aspects of the device were better than the iPod. But yet iPod was kicking their butt, right? Or Apple was kicking Microsoft's butt. So then he went over to went over to Apple, and basically articulated. He goes, "Yeah, they're better." And yeah, we don't care. Right. And so and you'll hear Bezos and everybody else the really hyper successful executives will say this. Microsoft at the time had a very, very intense focus on Apple, right? And getting better than Apple. Apple has and always will have a hyper intense focus on what? Their customer, right? Who are the people that we are trying to satiate and satisfy, right? In any industry, what is that, right? Who is that? And once you understand in great detail your customer, all the stuff we were talking about, you can walk back to greatness.
Absolutely. I think there's an important part that of what you said there, because we used to every marketing person does this, and that I've witnessed, and they're all wrong. And the reason, and I will say it in this way, and this is because Microsoft made that same mistake, and Apple doesn't make the mistake. I don't care about my competitors.
Right.
We're going to focus on what we do well, and we're going to demonstrate that we know our future customer base better than what our competitors do. And I don't need a side-by-side comparison. That side-by-side comparison, guess what? If you are the account manager going in there trying to sell this, and you bring me up a list of, here's how we stack up against our 5 competitors, guess what? I'm now going to go research your other competitors, and you might have just lost the job.
Right.
Because you're not going to get, now you just made it to where I've got this information. You may have sparked something that I didn't think about, and now I have to get my teams on that, prolong it, and you may have just lost the deal because you wanted to tell me about your competitors. And I see them spend so much time on, we do this better than our competitor. We do this better than blah 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 blah. I'm like, well, you're spending all this time telling me what you do better. I want to know what you do well. I don't know what you're doing well. So, that's a big part. And marketing people want that comparison. I don't want that. I think that's wrong. I want to go in there and go, this is why we're good. This is why you want us. And I can prove it. Bam, move.
It goes back to this. And in marketing, there's the 4 Ps, product, place, price, promotion. That is a recipe to, especially like in technology sales, like SaaS modeling sales, that's a race to the bottom in price, right? Yeah. Which you're never going to win, right? You don't create loyalty, right? What you create are customers, right? And who, when the price of your competitor's product becomes lower, they're going to jump ship and they're automatically going to go to it. I prefer to use the save method. We don't have a product, we have a solution. Right. And this is where where if marketing and sales are not in sync. And this is where in most organizations, I think most sales leaders shy away from getting in with their peers in the executive team and punching them in the mouth and go, look, I'm the voice of the customer. Right. And you're costing me money because you haven't done X, Y, and Z. This is what the customer wants. Where you get into conversations where the product are like, I don't know why they want it. Who cares? Right? Who cares why they want it? Right? They're not the only customer that want this, right? Why doesn't our roadmap reflect this? Why are you afraid to innovate, right? And so you have a solution, right? You're either, as a salesperson, taking people's money or you're providing them value, right? And if you're viewed as somebody who's just trying to retire quota, your effectiveness within your ability to reach your customer is going to be lessened. We don't have a place. Right, we've proved over the last year, you don't need to go to, for the most part, you don't need to go to a brick and mortar place to do most things, right? Certainly not in banking, certainly not in technology, right? But we don't have a place, we provide you access. That's a different thought process than a place. Access is where you are, a place is where I am. And if I'm the vendor, I want to meet you where you are. Whether it's physically or existentially, I want to meet you where you are. We don't have a price and we provide value. And this is what we were just talking about before. It's like, hey, if I got to go in and I got to announce all my other competitors and everything, value is a feeling, price is a thing.
Yeah.
Right. And if I got to put that up side by side, I lose. It's why an iPad is $300. Comparable iPad is $300 more expensive than Microsoft Surface, because most people don't give a shit. They want the integrated experience of, I got my iPhone, all my stuff just shows up together and it just works, right? And the social cachet or whatever people say, this makes me feel good. I don't care about a Microsoft product, right? I don't care about a Chromebook. I don't care about this. I just, what's the next item coming in?
Bite your tongue there. I care about my Chromebook and my Android devices.
I know,
not so much Microsoft.
But for you, those provide value, and you'll ignore something else because those are of value to you. Right?
Well, absolutely. And this gets into, as you were talking about the 4 Ps, I immediately started drifting to Porter's 5 forces, which is why if more marketing departments focused on that,
right,
and giving, and then really going, who and understanding that market. But then it comes back down to the buyer's power and your power. And as long as you can focus on, well, the supplier power and buyer power is really what I meant. Like those are the parts that you need to figure out, because that tells you how much, what's it going to take for you to get all the supplies you need in order to be able to find the customers who have the buying power to get it. Right. So, but I really like that Porter's 5 forces, because it says, hey, I need to know about my competitors because I need to know how I stack rank. But I don't want to tell my customer how we stack rank. They're going to figure it out.
Here's everybody else. In case you haven't done your research, here's everyone else you can go buy this from.
Right. And this is the thing that always gets me, because I'm going, okay, it doesn't matter what company it is. All right. There is someone out there that does a piece of what you do better.
Yes.
And now you're not being genuine. If I saw a chart like that and someone said, look, we overall feel we're better across the board in terms of the totality of the circumstances. But, but this part right here, we don't do as good as some of these ones, but we don't feel that's as important. If I saw anything like that, I'm like, well, hey, now I start to trust you a little bit, because at least you're being genuine. You're being honest, because there's no way. Because I mean, why do you all have all the check boxes? And yes, we're the buy, but these other things you're saying that people, no one's better than you in any of these categories. Like, I just know it's not.
Well, if you look like across the board, let's say that it's when you look at those diagrams where everybody's got the check boxes. Don't tell me about, okay, if another customer doesn't have something you do, sometimes that doesn't matter, because what's the value to you of that thing that they do or don't do, right? And but it's identify something that you both say that you do, and tell me that while they do that a little bit better than us, the sum of the parts leads us to be better, right? Because then it says it's not only that you have the appearance of sincerity, right? And that you should be more trustworthy. It's that you have a vision. But it all goes back to this. Most sales don't become a sale because the sales folks don't ask questions. Right? However you identify the question is always how and what is important to you, right? Because what is the value thing to you, right? And so if we can identify the value thing, then once we know that, then we're selling you the value that's important to you, right? And most people don't ask that. They don't ask for the sale. They don't ask, hey, when do you want to implement this? Because the easiest thing is a lot of times, if you ask that question, I'm not talking about the procurement department. I'm talking about IT dude on the ground that's battling everything they got to battle every day of the week, right? And I'm not talking about seasoned CIO that knows how to play the game because you've been the vendor tech guy before, as opposed to just being in corporate IT where you're the defense guy all the time. Hey, a perfect world, when do you want this to execute? And if they say why, I go, well, look, our solution takes a little bit of time to implement, whatever that time frame is. And so we want to make sure that we can meet your expectation. They're going to be like, all right, cool. Yeah, in a perfect world, it would be done yesterday. Right. And that's a more than often not answer, because you're savvy enough not to say that. Right. You're savvy enough to go, I've got a panic situation here. I've got a problem. I need a solution, but I need to know, and then go, your answer is probably going to be, hey, if we go with you as quickly as practicable to get it done, right? Because what are you going to find out in that moment? Hey, how long does it take you to implement the solution? Because in some cases, if another vendor it takes 60 days to implement it, it takes you guys 90, you might go with the other vendor because it gets into that, how much better. But you know what? I need to meet a timeline. You go, or you might say, hey, really what we need is 60 days. And then that allows a salesperson to go back into the deal team and say, hey, in order to win this business, this is what we need. Tell me why. And don't ask, tell me why we can't meet this, because I want to go back to the customer and tell them we're going to deliver. And it can't be 61 days because then I look like a jackass. Yeah. Right? And that internal argument fuels the external argument or external statement to the customer, right? And that's where people get off the rails, because now you're providing value, because you're saying, hey, what's important to you? I can deliver on that importance. And that's how you become a trusted advisor. Because the rest of it, you're just trying to retire quota. And, at some point when somebody finds somebody to deliver it cheaper, they'll go buy it from you or less annoying.
Yeah. So I'm reminded of, so back in the day when I used to work for secure computing, and, our big thing, which is, I think the whole reason why secure computing sold to McAfee is because no one really knew who we were. We would go to these shows and talk to customers and we're like, yeah, well, we make the Sidewinder firewall. They're like, oh my gosh, I've been using that for years. I'm like, hey, if we just had our name as being Sidewinder and it was Sidewinder Firewall, Sidewinder Web, then we would never have sold to McAfee because we would have been too valuable. But anyway, so when I would go in and start working with the customers, which our primary business was federal government. I mean, they're the only ones that truly, and some other, but they truly cared. But you go in there, so this was before Palo Alto's even came about. And so we were an application proxy firewall. And we knew there was only one other competitor at the time really in that space, which was CyberGuard, and we just bought them. So it didn't matter. So we eliminated that aspect. So when you go in and we would talk to the customers, we would say, find out, like, if they're just worried about speeds and feeds, we'll never stack up. Because when you're inspecting at the application, making sure everything meets the RFC compliance and that there's nothing wrong in that connection from that, it takes time.
Right.
So like it's what's important to them. If they're like, no, look, we need something that can do, has a terabyte backplane. Well, that's not us.
It's not us. Right.
We're not going to do that. Like if you want to care about the security piece of this, like inspecting that, like, here's a big thing. So back in the day, you could take AOL Instant Messenger, which was a big, huge gaping hole into any enterprise. Right. And I could change that to port 80 or 443, and it would go through because if every firewall is allowing 80 and 443 out.
Right.
Well, if you had the Sidewinder in there, it would take a look at it and go, wait a minute, this is not, there's no HTTP GET. So this can't be
right.
And it would deny the connection. Now Palo Alto, they did it a little bit different way. They call it, App ID.
Right.
And so they were able to figure out a way to speed that process up. And at that point, we're at McAfee, and the network of McAfee is where network appliances go to die. So they eventually, when Intel bought back,
by the way, they're not one of our sponsors.
Yeah, definitely not. I was honest with them that, look, if you're looking for something, want speeds, if he's like, we're not it. But I would challenge you to you probably don't need that level of throughput. Like it's
right.
just not there. You're not push that much traffic. But that was it was always fun because I'm like, look, if you want to, because then all of them started coming out with all these different like feature sets, and you like I used to call them net screens, but it was net screen that Juniper bought. You've got the product out there that's basically Chinese, Fortinet, Cisco, and so I'd be like, look, they turn on their app awareness, and all of a sudden they're at like 200 megabits, and look, I'm like, we're still doing a gig. Like we're right. telling you our application throughput's a gig. They turn theirs on and it's like 200 meg.
Right.
But their stateful inspection, they could easily get to the terabytes. You just start throwing more and more hardware at it. Like
we got, well, it's like, what are you asking them to do ultimately? Right. And, but when you start, especially with the Fed spaces, like people will tolerate, that Fed enterprise will tolerate, let's say, okay, well, you got a gig on yours, you get 200 gigs. Well, look, then I only have to buy from Cisco to solve my problem, right? And it becomes a buying ease as well, mm-hmm. right? But I more often than not, I'll hear where, it's that sales and marketing disconnect, and then products inability to support what needs to be supported, right? Because it's what happened 5 years ago shouldn't be a concern today.
It's history. I just want to make sure I don't make the same mistakes, and it's, so in the midst of COVID, we didn't really have a whole lot of remote access for the place where I was at in terms of our end users being able to do it. And so we had to kind of scramble at how we were going to do things. And eventually the goal being, virtual desktop infrastructure was the path we're going to take. But, normally it takes about 6 months to get that rolled out because you've got a lot of applications. Not everything works good from a VDI.
Yep.
And so you don't know. But I had to explain this to my stakeholders. I'm like, look, we're going to get this thing rolled out, and you all, every single one of you all, are going to be beta testers. It's not going to be perfect overnight, but we're going to get it out there, and we're just going to start using it, and then we're going to document all the issues that came up. We will huddle with the group, and we'll figure out which ones we can solve overnight, and then rinse, repeat, every day, and we'll just add. Eventually, it'll get better, and and now we can do full ITM. So right. ITM, for those who don't know, that's full video conferencing, basically, where when you go to an ATM, but an ITM is you can do all transactions. You're actually seeing a teller, with the video. They put their documents in, and you can actually get the scan, and they can process your transactions, with the person that's being done right there. Well, we're able to do that over our VDI infrastructure now. We couldn't in the beginning because we didn't know all that stuff, but we iterated, got better and better each day. But that's the job for me as a CIO, to explain to the stakeholders, the risks that are associated with this, what's going to go well, what's not going to go well, and that we have a plan for those things that aren't going to go well as to how we're going to iterate to get us in a position to where things will be operating. I hate saying new norm, because to me, this is what should have always been the norm. Is VDI makes it so much easier for patching and all this other.
It's not new norm. It's next generation, or like what we expected. No, but what you expected a computer to do and the network to do in 2005 is certainly not what we should have as an expectation in 21. Right? You should have an expectation of innovation, and sometimes it's fueled by extreme circumstances. But what you're really talking about was you had the ability and the desire to be completely transparent with your management about here's where we're at, here's what we need to do. And most of that, and I'm going to, the assumption I'm making right off the bat is that your CEO has put you and the rest of the executive team in a mode where you feel comfortable that, hey, there's some variables that we don't know today. And explaining the unknown so that people aren't surprised when there's things that happen, right? Because what you did is set the table for the entire team to go, all right, cool. Our job's to help. It's not to criticize. And if you didn't have that level of transparency, that like, hey, there's some stuff here it's just out of bounds stuff that everybody in America is trying to figure out right now with COVID. Every business is going to have to deal with this to a certain extent. I want your help. I want you to be a beta tester. And everybody in life likes to feel they're part of the club and part of the solution. And that level of transparency is what gets you to the place where you can have an organization that the technology isn't functioning correctly and people aren't throwing their hands up in the air going, oh, the fucking tech guys, blah, blah, all the typical crap that happens. Right? But I think that's the thing. It's the human nature piece. Right?
Oh, yeah.
We want technology to solve all of our problems. It still comes back to what's the end state. We're trying to get humans to communicate with each other more efficiently and more securely than they did yesterday.
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned that the framework. So up until, we'll just say, I want to say it was October of last year. My boss John's job was already difficult because he's had to manage me. So that's I'm always pushing
John,
boundaries.
As a guy that's done that before, I'm with you, brother.
Pushing the boundaries and our chief marketing officer, and so the other people were a little bit easier to manage. Well, now he's got the most difficult job because our CFO retired and we've hired a new CFO. We've got a new chief revenue officer. We've got a new chief strategy officer. And now he's having to manage like 5 thoroughbred top class racehorses. And it's because, so before he was like, all right, I don't have to worry about this because this person could. Now all of us are like pushing, like, no, go, 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 go. And so now he's got an impossible job of keeping us all within that framework because, we're all high performing, thoroughbreds that are looking to go, go, go. But that's probably, I would much rather have the need to pull people back than have to push them to get out there and do it. Like, go make some mistakes.
The funny thing is, that tells me just how much of a high functioning human he is as a leader.
Oh yeah.
To be able to say, look, I don't know everything, and I want people. If everybody in the room is better at their individual tasks than I am, then it allows me it gives me a greater, like my field and depth of vision is greater. And now I just have to call the play.
Yeah.
Right. That's like, all I got to hear. What's the situation? I've got the best advice I can be getting. And what's the correct play to call?
Yep.
right? And I think you guys are. I think that sets you guys ultimately up for success.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fun. I mean, I'm glad that we've got all these people that are passionate about their purpose within the company.
That's
and I think
awesome.
that's the key. Like it's, if you're just passionate, well, fire's passionate, right? It's going to burn out but but if you're not using it to create that warmth and to cook your food, and who cares? Like the purpose of fire is not just
to burn your house down. The purpose of fire is not just to burn your house down, right? I mean, it's like you have to control the passion with purpose.
Exactly. And so I think we're all functioning quite well. So anyway, I know you have a hard stop at 9, and that's where we're at. So have fun with basketball. Have a great rest of your week.
I will. You as well. And I will see you again on Sunday.
Yes, sir. All right, everyone. Take care.
Have a great weekend. Great week, everyone.